Dr. Victoria Stone pressed her fingers against her tired eyes as the fluorescent lights of Seattle General Hospital hummed overhead. 3 years of genetic research had prepared her for many things, but not for the case files sitting on her desk. The blood samples from room 314 had been tested 17 times, and each result defied everything she knew about human biology. James Hartwell lay unconscious in the trauma bay, his dark hair matted with concrete dust from the construction site. Accident. A steel beam had pinned him for nearly 2 hours before the rescue team could free him. Any normal person would have died from blood loss or organ damage, but James had walked away with nothing more than scratches that were already beginning to heal. The impossible blood work nurse, Linda Torres, approached Victoria with another set of lab results. "Doctor, the blood chemistry is still showing those same anomalies. His cellular regeneration rate is measuring at 3 times normal human baseline." Victoria took the papers, her brown eyes scanning the numbers that made no sense. Every protein marker, every enzyme level, every genetic sequence pointed to something that should not exist. "Have you checked the equipment calibration again?" "Twice," Linda replied. "I even ran samples from other patients to make sure our machines were working properly. Everything else tests normal. It's just this one patient." Victoria stood up from her desk and walked toward the recovery room. Through the observation window, she could see James beginning to stir. His girlfriend Isabella sat beside his bed, holding his hand and whispering soft words of encouragement. The young woman's olive skin and gentle features showed the strain of worry, but there was something else Victoria noticed. Isabella's eyes held an unusual amber quality that seemed to catch the light in strange ways. The first signs of something unusual, James opened his eyes slowly, blinking against the harsh hospital lighting. Victoria entered the room with her tablet, introducing herself to both patients. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm Dr. Stone from the genetics department. How are you feeling?" "Better than I should be," James admitted, his voice surprisingly strong for someone who had been unconscious for 6 hours. "The pain is almost gone completely." Victoria noted his rapid recovery in her tablet. "I'd like to ask you some questions about your family medical history. Have your parents ever mentioned anything unusual about your bloodline or ancestry?" Isabella squeezed James's hand. "Tell her about your grandmother's stories." James looked uncomfortable. "My grandmother used to tell stories about our family coming from somewhere far away across the ocean. She said we had special blood that made us different from other people. I always thought they were just old folktales." The temperature mystery Victoria checked James's vital signs personally. His temperature read 102.1 degrees Fahrenheit, yet he showed no signs of fever or distress. His skin felt warm but not burning, and his breathing remained steady and calm. "Mr. Hartwell, do you normally run a high body temperature?" "I've always been warm-blooded," he replied with a slight smile. "Isabella jokes that I'm like a human heater in the winter months." Isabella nodded. "He never gets cold, even in Seattle rainstorms. I used to think he was just one of those people with good circulation." Victoria made more notes. The pattern was becoming clearer, but it pointed toward something impossible. She decided to test something. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm going to shine this penlight in your eyes. Just look directly at it for me." As the bright LED light hit James's eyes, Victoria watched in fascination. His pupils, which had been normal round circles, suddenly contracted into narrow vertical slits like those of a reptile. The amber color of his irises seemed to glow with an inner light. The genetic puzzle back in her laboratory, Victoria prepared slides of James's blood under the microscope. What she saw made her sit back in her chair and question her own training. The red blood cells were slightly larger than normal human cells, with a different internal structure. The white blood cells moved with unusual speed and seemed to coordinate. Their movements in patterns she had never observed. Dr. Benjamin Cross knocked on her laboratory door before entering. The head of paleogenetics was a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Linda mentioned you have an interesting case that might relate to my department. Benjamin, I need you to look at something. Victoria gestured to the microscope. Tell me what you see. Benjamin peered through the eyepiece, adjusting the focus. After several minutes, he looked up with confusion. The cellular structure resembles human blood, but there are significant differences. The mitochondrial density is much higher, which would explain increased energy production. The protein structures are unlike anything in our current databases. I've run the DNA through every genetic database available, Victoria said. Human, primate, mammalian, reptilian. No matches anywhere. The ancient connection Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, staring at the blood sample. Victoria, there might be something relevant in my current research. We recently acquired a fossilized specimen from the Himalayas that has been giving us unusual readings. The bone structure and mineral composition don't match any known species from that time period. How old is the specimen? Approximately 75 million years old. Late Cretaceous period, right before the mass extinction event that wiped out the dinosaurs. Benjamin paused. The local people who discovered it had a specific name for the creature. They called it the fire serpent. Victoria felt a chill run through the air-conditioned laboratory. You think there could be a connection? I think we need to run a comparative DNA analysis between your patient's blood and any genetic material we can extract from the fossil. Benjamin's expression grew serious. If there's even a small genetic correlation, it would change everything we understand about evolution and human development. The healing mystery deepens over the next 2 days. Victoria continued monitoring James as an outpatient. His recovery was nothing short of miraculous. The bruising from the construction accident had completely disappeared, and small cuts on. His arms were healing so quickly that she could observe the process in real time. Mr. Hartwell, I need to ask about other unusual abilities. Can you hold your breath longer than most people? James exchanged a glance with Isabella. I used to. Win all the swimming contests as a kid. I could stay underwater for nearly 8 minutes without coming up for air. 8 minutes. Victoria tried to hide her amazement. The world record for breath-holding was just over 11 minutes, and that was by trained professionals. There's something else, Isabella added quietly. James can see perfectly in complete darkness. I've watched him navigate our apartment with all the lights off, like it was broad daylight. The growing mystery Victoria returned to her laboratory that evening with more questions than answers. She had contacted geneticists at universities across the country, but none had encountered anything similar to James's case. His blood chemistry remained stable but impossible. His healing abilities continued to accelerate, and his physical characteristics suggested something far beyond normal human variation. She thought about Benjamin's fossil discovery and felt a growing certainty that the two mysteries were connected. The timing could not be coincidental. A man with inexplicable DNA appears at the same time as an ancient fossil with unknown genetic properties. As Victoria prepared to leave for the night, she received a message from the DNA sequencing department. The preliminary results from the fossil extraction would be available the next morning. She had a feeling that those results would change everything they thought they knew about human evolution and the creatures that once shared the earth with early mammals. The rain continued to fall against the laboratory windows as Victoria gathered her research files. Tomorrow would bring answers, but she suspected those answers would only lead to bigger questions about the true nature of human heritage, and then ancient secrets hidden within DNA that medical science was only beginning to understand. Dr. Benjamin Cross stood in his pristine laboratory at dawn, staring at the fossilized skeleton that had consumed his thoughts for months. The creature stretched, nearly 12 feet in length, its bone structure unlike any dinosaur species in the paleontological record. The skull alone measured 3 feet from snout to crown, with eye sockets large enough to accommodate organs of incredible complexity. Dr. Victoria Stone entered the laboratory, carrying her analysis of James Hartwell's DNA samples. The previous night had been sleepless for both researchers as they prepared for this moment. "Benjamin, are you ready for the comparison?" "The genetic extraction equipment finished running at 4 this morning," Benjamin replied, gesturing toward a bank of sophisticated machines humming quietly in the corner. "I've never seen DNA preservation this complete in a specimen this ancient." The Seoul University Connection, VR? Rachel Kim arrived from Seoul University that afternoon. Her expertise in ancient DNA analysis requested specifically for this unprecedented case. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and steady hands that had worked with genetic material from extinct species across 3 continents. "Dr. Cross sent me the preliminary data," Rachel said, setting up her portable analysis equipment. "The molecular structure of this fossil's genetic material shows characteristics I've never encountered. The base pair sequences are familiar enough to be recognizably terrestrial, but complex enough to suggest evolutionary paths that modern science hasn't documented." Victoria handed Rachel the complete analysis of James's blood work. "Compare these sequences with what you've extracted from the fossil." Rachel loaded both datasets into her quantum computer analysis system. The processing would take several hours, but initial pattern recognition algorithms would provide preliminary results within 30 minutes. The mythology expert arrives. Professor Miguel Santos entered the laboratory as the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows. The mythology expert from the University of Washington carried several ancient texts and a leather portfolio thick with research notes. "Benjamin called me about a discovery that might relate to my research on dragon legends across world cultures," Miguel said, his accented English carrying the authority of decades spent studying ancient civilizations. "I've brought texts from Tibet, China, medieval Europe, and pre-Columbian America that describe remarkably similar creatures." Miguel opened one of his books to a detailed illustration from a 13th century manuscript. The drawing showed a serpentine creature with 4 legs, massive wings, and intelligent eyes. This particular image comes from a monastery in the Himalayas, less than 50 miles from where your fossil was discovered. The computer analysis begins. Rachel's equipment began displaying preliminary results on 3 large monitors. Genetic sequences scrolled past in colorful patterns, with matching segments highlighted in bright yellow. The room fell silent as the scientists watched the comparison unfold. "The initial scan is showing sequence similarities," Rachel announced, her voice careful and measured. "More similarities than should be possible given the temporal distance between these samples." The first monitor displayed James's human DNA in blue. The second showed the fossil's extracted genetic material in red. The third monitor began highlighting matching sequences in brilliant gold as the computer identified correlations. 12% sequence homology, Rachel read from her analysis screen. 15%, 20%. Her voice grew quieter. With each increasing number, Victoria felt her heart racing. Even a 5% genetic correlation would be significant. At 20%, they were looking at a direct evolutionary relationship. The ancient texts speak. Miguel spread several manuscripts across a clear table, pointing to illustrations and text passages from different civilizations. "Look at the consistency across cultures that had no contact with each other." Tibetan monks describe fire serpents that could take human form. Chinese legends speak of dragon kings who ruled alongside early human emperors. He opened a leather-bound journal filled with his own translations. European medieval texts describe encounters with creatures of incredible intelligence that could communicate telepathically. North American tribes tell stories of sky serpents that mated with human women, creating bloodlines with special abilities. Benjamin studied the illustrations carefully. The proportions and anatomical details matched remarkably well with the fossilized skeleton in his laboratory. Professor Santos, do any of these texts mention specific abilities or characteristics of human descendants? Miguel nodded, flipping through pages of handwritten notes. Enhanced healing, resistance to extreme temperatures, the ability to see in complete darkness, unusual longevity, and heightened physical strength. Some accounts describe individuals who could hold their breath for impossible lengths of time or sense electromagnetic changes in their environment. The genetic revelation Rachel's analysis computer chimed with a completion signal. All three scientists and Miguel gathered around the monitors as the final results displayed. The sequence homology had reached 52%. 52%. Genetic correlation, Rachel whispered. This level of similarity indicates direct lineage. Mr. Hartwell is carrying active genetic material from this creature. Victoria stared at the data in disbelief. But this specimen is 75 million years old. How could genetic material survive that long and remain active in a modern human? The preservation conditions in the Himalayan ice caves are unlike anything we've studied, Benjamin explained. The mineral content of the surrounding rock, combined with the elevation and constant freezing temperatures, created a natural genetic storage environment. Rachel was already running additional analyses on her secondary computer. I'm detecting something else in Mr. Hartwell's DNA. Viral integration sequences that suggest genetic material was artificially preserved and transmitted across generations. The interbreeding theory. Miguel looked up from his ancient texts with sudden understanding. The legends consistently mention interbreeding between these creatures and early humans. Not random mating, but deliberate genetic integration. Chinese texts describe dragon kings choosing specific human partners to continue their bloodlines. You're suggesting intentional genetic preservation, Victoria said slowly. That these creatures deliberately passed their genetic material to humans before their species became extinct. Benjamin examined the fossil skeleton with new appreciation. The brain case structure suggests intelligence comparable to modern humans. If they understood their approaching extinction, they might have chosen to preserve their species through genetic integration with the dominant surviving mammals. Rachel's computer displayed a three-dimensional model of the integrated DNA sequences. The viral integration patterns are too precise to be natural. These genetic sequences were artificially inserted and designed to remain dormant until activated by specific environmental triggers. James's expanding abilities. Victoria received a phone call from the hospital during their analysis. James Hartwell had been experiencing new symptoms throughout the day. His body temperature had risen to 104 degrees without any signs of illness or discomfort. His girlfriend Isabella reported that his strength had increased dramatically, and he had accidentally broken a door handle by turning it normally. We need to bring him here, Victoria decided. If his genetic expression is accelerating, we need to monitor the changes. Miguel gathered his texts and research materials. I should remain here as well. If Mr. Hartwell truly carries the genetic legacy of these ancient creatures, he may begin manifesting abilities that we can only understand through historical accounts. The hidden population. Rachel's analysis had identified the specific genetic markers that indicated dragon heritage. She began running searches through genetic databases around the world, looking for similar patterns in other individuals. Victoria, we may be looking at more than just one isolated case, Rachel said, studying her search results. I'm finding similar genetic markers in approximately 1 out of every 10,000 humans worldwide. The concentration is higher in certain geographical areas, particularly regions where dragon legends are most prevalent. Benjamin felt a chill of realization. You're suggesting there's an entire hidden population of people carrying these genetic markers. Most of them probably have no idea, Rachel replied. The genes appear to remain dormant unless triggered by specific environmental factors. Extreme trauma, electrical shock, exposure to certain mineral compositions, or high stress situations. The approaching convergence. As evening approached, the team prepared for James Hartwell's arrival at the laboratory. Victoria had arranged for a full medical monitoring setup, while Benjamin prepared detailed questions about the fossil's discovery location and the conditions that had preserved its genetic material so perfectly. Miguel continued, translating ancient texts, searching for information about activation triggers and the full range of abilities that might manifest in human descendants of these creatures. Each account he read suggested that the transformation process was gradual but irreversible once begun. Rachel worked to understand the viral integration mechanisms that had allowed genetic material from an extinct species to remain viable across millions of years. Her analysis suggested that the preservation method was more sophisticated than any modern genetic engineering technique. The fossil skeleton seemed to watch over their preparations, its empty eye sockets holding secrets that were finally beginning to reveal themselves. The convergence of ancient legend, modern genetics, and human evolution was about to provide answers to questions that science had never known how to ask. As the laboratory lights illuminated the ancient bones and modern equipment, the boundary between myth and reality continued to dissolve. The creature that had been dismissed as fantasy was proving to be the key to understanding human potential that had remained hidden for millennia. James Hartwell entered the paleogenetics laboratory with Isabella by his side, his movements more fluid and purposeful than Victoria had observed during his hospital stay. His amber eyes seemed to glow with an inner light that had grown more pronounced over the past 24 hours, and his skin carried a subtle shimmer that became visible under the bright laboratory lights. Professor Miguel Santos approached them carefully, his weathered hands carrying a leather journal filled with ancient accounts. Mr. Hartwell, I've spent the last 40 years studying creatures that I believed were mythological. Today, I'm meeting someone who proves that the boundaries between legend and reality are far thinner than we imagined. James studied the fossilized skeleton that dominated the center of the laboratory. Standing before the ancient bones, he felt a strange recognition, as if some deep part of his mind remembered this form. The dreams have been getting stronger, he said quietly. I see landscapes that don't exist anymore, cities built into mountainsides, creatures like this one living alongside humans. Isabella's surprising discovery. Rachel Kim had prepared genetic testing equipment for Isabella, suspecting that James's abilities might not be isolated to his bloodline alone. As Isabella provided blood samples, she mentioned experiences she had previously dismissed as imagination. I've always been able to sense James's emotions, even when he's not here, Isabella explained to Victoria. Sometimes I know when he's in danger before he calls to tell me. My grandmother used to say I had witch blood, but I thought it was just superstition. Rachel's preliminary analysis of Isabella's DNA revealed the same viral integration sequences they had found in James, though at a lower concentration. Isabella, you're carrying approximately 30% of the same genetic markers. The concentration is lower, but the sequences are definitely present. Miguel looked up from his texts with sudden understanding. The legends speak of paired bloodlines. Dragon kings would choose human partners not just for reproduction, but for genetic compatibility. The abilities were designed to work in complementary pairs. The electromagnetic discovery. Dr. Benjamin Cross had been monitoring electromagnetic readings throughout the laboratory using sensitive detection equipment. As James moved closer to the fossil skeleton, The instruments registered significant fluctuations in the local electromagnetic field. "James, I need you to place your hand on this detector," Benjamin requested, indicating a sophisticated sensor. "Array, I'm reading electromagnetic signatures that shouldn't be possible from biological sources." When James touched the detector, the readings spiked dramatically. The equipment registered electromagnetic pulses similar to those produced by electric eels, but at much higher frequencies and intensities. "The fossil is responding to your presence," Benjamin observed. "The mineral content in the bones is becoming electromagnetically active." Isabella moved closer to James, and the detector readings intensified further. "The paired bloodlines amplify each other's abilities," Rachel noted, studying the data streams. "Isabella's genetic markers are activating in response to James's electromagnetic field." The global population revelation, Rachel's worldwide genetic database searches, had returned startling results. Her computer screens displayed a world map with glowing points indicating locations where individuals carried the dormant dragon genetic markers. "The distribution pattern isn't random," Rachel explained to the assembled team. "The highest concentrations are in regions where ancient dragon legends are most prevalent. Tibet, the Scottish Highlands, the Andes Mountains, certain islands in the Pacific, and parts of the American Southwest." Miguel opened several historical maps, comparing Rachel's genetic distribution with his own research on dragon mythology. "The correlation is remarkable. Every major dragon legend site corresponds with a high concentration of genetic carriers." Victoria studied the data with growing amazement. "You're showing us evidence that these creatures didn't just interbreed randomly with early humans. They established specific population centers designed to preserve their genetic legacy." The activation mechanism James had been experiencing increasingly dramatic physical changes throughout the day. His strength had increased to the point where he needed to be careful not to damage equipment or furniture. His night vision had become so acute that normal indoor lighting seemed uncomfortably bright. "The electrical storm that preceded your construction accident," Benjamin said, connecting patterns from James's medical history. "Lightning strikes create electromagnetic pulses similar to what we're detecting from your body now." Miguel found a relevant passage in one of his Tibetan manuscripts. Ancient texts describe awakening ceremonies that involved exposure to what they called sky fire during specific astronomical alignments. The ceremonies were performed in high-altitude locations with specific mineral compositions. Rachel ran calculations on her computer. The construction site where James was injured sits directly over a geological formation with unusual mineral content. Iron, copper, and rare earth elements in concentrations that would create natural electromagnetic amplification. The historical timeline unveiled. Working together, the team began reconstructing the historical timeline of dragon-human integration. Miguel's ancient texts provided cultural evidence. Benjamin's fossil analysis revealed biological mechanisms. And Rachel's genetic research demonstrated the preservation methods. Approximately 70 million years ago, these creatures faced extinction from the asteroid impact, Benjamin explained. But unlike dinosaurs, they possessed the intelligence to recognize the approaching catastrophe and plan for survival. Miguel translated passages from Chinese texts that described the Great Choosing, when dragon kings selected human partners based on genetic compatibility and intelligence. The interbreeding wasn't random mating. It was a deliberate genetic preservation program spanning thousands of years. Rachel's analysis showed how the viral integration sequences were designed to remain dormant until triggered by specific environmental conditions. They essentially turned select human bloodlines into genetic storage banks, preserving their abilities until conditions were right for reactivation. Isabella's transformation begins as the day progressed. Isabella began manifesting her own abilities in response to James's increasing genetic expression. Her eyes started showing flecks of gold, and she reported enhanced sensory perception that allowed her to detect subtle changes in air pressure and humidity. "I can feel the electromagnetic fields from the equipment," Isabella told Victoria. "It's like seeing colors that don't have names, patterns of energy that flow through everything." James took Isabella's hand, and both of them experienced a surge of shared consciousness. For several moments, they could sense each other's thoughts and emotions with perfect clarity. Miguel found references to this phenomenon in multiple ancient cultures. Paired bloodline carriers could share consciousness and amplify each other's abilities. The legends describe it as two halves of a single soul finding completion. The modern implications Victoria realized that their discovery had implications far beyond academic research. If thousands of people worldwide carried dormant dragon genetic markers, and if environmental triggers could activate these abilities, humanity was on the verge of an evolutionary leap. "We need to consider the ethical implications," Victoria said during a team conference. "If we publish this research, people will start seeking ways to activate their dormant genes. We could be responsible for triggering widespread genetic transformations." Benjamin agreed with her concerns. The abilities James is manifesting include electromagnetic manipulation, enhanced physical strength, and sensory perception beyond human norms. In the wrong hands, these could be weaponized. Rachel had been monitoring global genetic databases for similar cases. "I'm finding increasing reports of individuals with unusual abilities seeking medical attention. The activation triggers are becoming more common due to modern technology, environmental changes, and electromagnetic pollution." The future of human evolution. As evening approached, James and Isabella had formed an almost telepathic connection that allowed them to communicate without words. Their electromagnetic signatures had synchronized, creating a field that could influence electronic equipment throughout the laboratory. The ancient texts describe this as the beginning phase of full awakening, Miguel explained. According to the legends, paired bloodline carriers will gradually develop the ability to influence matter at the molecular level, communicate across vast distances, and perceive dimensions of reality that normal humans cannot access. Victoria watched James and Isabella with scientific fascination and human concern. "The question we're facing is whether humanity is ready for this evolutionary step. These abilities represent power that could transform civilization or destroy it." The choice ahead. The team spent their final hours together discussing the weight of their discovery. They had uncovered evidence that human evolution was guided by an extinct species that had preserved its genetic legacy through millions of years of careful planning. James and Isabella stood before the fossil skeleton as the laboratory lights dimmed. Their transformation was accelerating, and they could sense other awakening bloodline carriers around the world through electromagnetic connections that transcended physical distance. "The choice isn't whether to reveal this information," James said, his voice carrying new harmonics that resonated through the laboratory equipment. "The awakening has already begun. People with dormant genes are starting to activate naturally as environmental conditions change." Isabella nodded, her eyes now fully golden and luminous. "We can either help guide this transition or let it happen chaotically. The dragon legacy wasn't meant to replace humanity, but to elevate it." Victoria made her decision as the first rays of dawn entered the laboratory windows. The research would be published, but with careful ethical guidelines and support systems for individuals discovering their genetic heritage. Humanity was about to rediscover abilities that had been sleeping in its DNA for millions of years, and the world would never be the same.